I had always prided myself on being a man who noticed the details. The subtle changes in tone, the micro-expressions that flitted across someone's face when they were hiding something. These were the things I had built my life around. Laura and I had been married for 6 years. We weren't just husband and wife. We were partners, best friends, confidants. At least that's what I thought. Looking back, I see now that the foundation had been rotting for a while. It started with the small things. Her phone, once carelessly left on the counter, was now glued to her hand. A new password. Late nights at work that didn't align with the messages I caught glimpses of on her screen. The scent of unfamiliar cologne on her clothes, masked under expensive perfume. I ignored it at first, rationalized it. Everyone deserves privacy. She was just stressed. Work had been demanding lately, but doubt is a cancer. It doesn't stop at the first cell. Spreads, multiplies, consumes. The turning point came on a Tuesday night. She had mentioned a company retreat, a last-minute trip she forgot to tell me about. It was unlike her to be so disorganized, but I played along, kissed her goodbye, told her to have a good time. An hour later, I placed a tracker in her car. Not because I was the jealous type, not because I was insecure, but because something inside me whispered, she is lying, and I needed to know the truth. The moment Laura's car disappeared down our street, I sat in front of my laptop, watching the small blinking move across the map. She wasn't heading toward the mountains where the retreat was supposedly taking place. No, her route was erratic, turning down side streets, stopping at odd locations for minutes at a time, as if she was checking for a tail. She knew, not about the tracker but about the fragility of her lie. For nearly an hour, I watched her movements. At first, she followed the highway, the same direction her coworkers would have gone. But then she veered off course, exiting into a part of the city neither of us had any business in. A place where neon lights buzzed in dark alleys, where the respectable avoided setting foot. Then she stopped. A small building, tucked between a storage facility and a crumbling warehouse. No signs, no obvious purpose, just an unremarkable gray structure with a single red door. I gritted my teeth, grabbed my keys, and left. By the time I arrived, I didn't park nearby. Instead, I left my car a block away and moved carefully, using the darkness to my advantage. From across the street, I watched as she stepped out of her vehicle, glancing over her shoulder once before approaching the door. It opened before she could knock. A man's silhouette stood there. He was taller than me, broader. His hand reached out, fingers sliding over her waist as she stepped inside without hesitation. I waited, breathing slow, forcing my heartbeat under control. There was no sign, no logo, no indication of what this place was. But I would find out, and when I did, there would be no mercy. I stood in the shadows across the street, my hands clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The red door had closed behind Laura, swallowing her whole. My wife, my Laura, had just stepped into a place that didn't belong in the life we built together. I needed to know what was inside. My first instinct was to storm in, demand answers, and tear apart whatever secret she was hiding. But instincts get men killed. Logic keeps them alive. I took a deep breath, scanning the area. The building was isolated, no windows, no security cameras, at least none I could see. That alone told me something. Whoever ran this place didn't want attention. A side alley ran along the length of the building, narrow and choked with garbage. I moved through it carefully, my footsteps silent. At the back I found another door.
No handles. No keypads.
Just a metal slab, smooth and uninviting. But luck was on my side. A small ventilation window sat above, slightly cracked open. I climbed. It wasn't easy. I wasn't a gymnast, but I was desperate. Hands gripping the rusted frame, I hoisted myself up, inching forward until I could peer inside. And that's when I saw it. The room was dimly lit, a mix of red and gold hues casting eerie shadows. Heavy drapes covered the walls, muting the sound of the outside world. A circular arrangement of deep leather chairs filled the space, occupied by men. All of them dressed in expensive suits, their faces half hidden by ornate masks. And in the center of it all, Laura. Not just Laura. Others. Women kneeling, heads bowed. Silent. Waiting. My stomach churned. My vision darkening at the edges. This wasn't just an affair. This was something worse. Much worse. My breath caught in my throat. I had prepared myself to see her with another man, to witness an affair, to confirm a betrayal. But this was beyond anything I had imagined. Laura wasn't just here. She belonged here. She moved with familiarity, kneeling before a man in a dark mask, her head bowed in submission. The others, women like her, mirrored her posture, their hands resting delicately on their thighs. The men sat in silence, observing, expectant. I strained to hear, my pulse a hammer in my ears. A voice broke the stillness. Low, deliberate, commanding. Tonight, we welcome another. A figure stepped forward. A woman, nervous, uncertain. Not Laura, but someone new. A fresh face, wide-eyed and shaking. Laura reached out, took her hand. Her expression was soft, reassuring. I had seen that look before. It was the same one she gave me when we first met. The same one she gave me on our wedding day. And now she was giving it to someone else. The man in the mask continued. You have proven yourself worthy of the invitation. But to stay, you must obey. The woman swallowed hard but nodded. The men leaned forward. Anticipation thickened the air. Laura stood, guiding the woman toward the center of the room. She whispered something in her ear, something I couldn't hear. Then she turned back toward the masked men. And she smiled. A slow, knowing smile. A smile that told me this was no accident.
No mistake.
She had chosen this. She had chosen them. And as my vision blurred with fury, I realized something even more disturbing. This wasn't her first time. I dropped down from the window ledge, landing in a crouch, my breath steady but my mind in turmoil. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't forced. She chose this. I had braced myself for the kind of betrayal that came with guilt, with shame. A moment of weakness, a drunken mistake, a man she met who made her forget about me. But this was different. This was deliberate, cult-like, and she was deep in it. I pressed my back against the cold brick wall, fists clenching and unclenching as my brain scrambled for my next move. I couldn't storm in. I didn't know who these people were, how deep their connections ran, or how far they would go to protect their secret. No, I needed patience, precision, plan. So I did what any man in my position would do. I joined them. The next day, I returned to the building in broad daylight. The red door was locked, as expected. No signs, no markings. From the outside, it was just another forgotten structure in the city's underbelly. But I wasn't looking for a door. I was looking for a weakness. Took me hours of quiet observation before I found it. A man, mid-50s, sharply dressed, stepped out from the building's side entrance, adjusting his tie with one hand while scrolling through his phone with the other. I followed him. He led me to a high-end cigar lounge across town, where he settled into a private booth. I didn't approach him right away. Instead, I listened, watched, studied. An hour passed before I made my move. I walked up to his table, slow, measured. Just another face in a sea of wealthy, nameless men. He barely looked up, until I placed a black envelope on the table. The same kind Laura had hidden in the drawer by her bedside. The same kind that had led her to them. His fingers twitched, and finally he met my eyes. "I see," he murmured, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You've been chosen." I gave him the smallest nod, keeping my expression unreadable. He smiled. "Welcome." The man, who introduced himself as Donovan, didn't ask how I got the envelope. He didn't ask who sent it. That told me everything I needed to know. They didn't recruit. They watched. They tested. And if you had the envelope, you were already past the first stage. "Have you attended before?" Donovan asked, swirling his drink lazily. I knew the right answer. "No," I said. "But I've been waiting for the opportunity." He smirked, like he had heard that 1,000 times before. "There's a process," he said. slipping a folded card from his breast pocket. An initiation. Show up here tomorrow night. Alone.
No phones.
No questions. I took the card without hesitation. If I was going to destroy them, I had to get inside first. The location Donovan gave me was far outside the city. An estate hidden behind wrought iron gates, guarded by men who didn't look like the usual hired security. They didn't pat me down, didn't ask my name. One of them, a tall, silent brute, simply gestured toward a pathway leading through a dense, lantern-lit garden. I walked. The house loomed ahead, its windows dark despite the golden glow of the pathway lights. As I stepped inside, I found myself in a dimly lit hall lined with deep red curtains, the air thick with an unfamiliar scent, something musky, almost medicinal. A woman stood near the entrance, masked, dressed in an elegant black gown that left her shoulders bare. "Follow me," she said softly. I did. She led me past a row of doors, each identical, each closed. But from behind them I heard sounds. Low murmurs, uneven breathing, soft gasps, control and surrender woven into one twisted symphony. At the end of the hall, she stopped before an unmarked door and turned to face me. "This is your test." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes, what little I could see behind the mask, held something else. Anticipation. I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside. The door shut behind me with a quiet click. And I saw her. Not Laura. Someone else. A woman, blindfolded, kneeling in the center of the room, hands bound in silk, chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. She didn't move when I entered, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge me at all, because she knew the rules. Obedience, submission, trust. I clenched my jaw, my muscles coiled tight. This wasn't a game. This wasn't some exclusive underground affair. This was ownership, conditioning, a machine designed to strip people of themselves. And Laura had willingly become a part of it. I exhaled slowly, forcing my rage down. If I reacted now, I'd be dead by morning. So I did what I had to. I knelt in front of the woman, and I whispered, "Do you want to leave?" She stiffened. Her lips parted just barely. Then, the door behind me unlocked. The test wasn't about her. It was about me, and someone had been watching the entire time. The door creaked open behind me, and I knew without turning that someone was standing there, watching, judging. I didn't react. Couldn't. If I showed even a flicker of hesitation, if I exposed the fury rising in my gut, everything would be over before it even began. A slow clap echoed through the dimly lit room. "Well," a voice murmured, male, calm, amused. "You understand restraint. That's rare." I finally turned. The man in the doorway was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. No mask, no attempt to hide his face. Because he didn't need to. Power wasn't something he had to show. He was power. He studied me like I was a specimen under a microscope. "What's your name?" I met his gaze.
Bleed effortlessly.
"Daniel." A slow smirk. "Daniel, what would you have done if I hadn't interrupted?" I kept my expression neutral. Followed orders. Silence stretched between us. Then he nodded, stepping aside, gesturing for me to follow. "She's not real, you know," he said as we walked.
A prop.
A test. They all are. I didn't respond, because I understood something in that moment. This wasn't just about indulgence. It was about control, reprogramming, breaking people down until they belonged to the group, not themselves. And Laura had chosen this over our life together. The thought made my blood boil, but I pushed it down, played the part. He led me into a vast, open lounge. Deep leather chairs, more masked men, more silent women, moving like ghosts between them. And at the center of it all, Laura. She was laughing softly at something, her hand resting on the knee of a man whose face was hidden behind an intricately carved mask. A gesture so casual, so intimate, that my vision blurred with red. But I didn't let it show. Couldn't. Because this wasn't the moment for anger. This was the moment to set the trap. I forced myself to move slowly, deliberately.
No sudden reactions.
No tells. Because in this room, predators smelled weakness before it even formed. I walked to the bar at the far end of the lounge, keeping my movements casual, but my mind was a razor blade. Watching, calculating. Laura was still laughing, her hand lingering too long on the masked man's knee. I studied his posture, relaxed, confident, comfortable with her touch. She had done this before, not just with him but with others. I ordered a drink I had no intention of consuming. Something strong, burning, to match the fury caged inside me. The man beside me chuckled. First time. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze. His mask was simple, black, unadorned. The kind worn by someone who didn't need to prove anything. I exhaled through my nose, offering a faint smirk. That obvious? He sipped his drink, watching the room. You have the look of a man trying to decide if this is the best night of his life, or the worst. I gave a low chuckle. And which is it? He shrugged. Depends on what you're here for. I filed that response away. Every sentence in a place like this meant something. So I tested him. I'm here for what we all are, aren't I? I said, tilting my glass toward the room. He smiled behind his mask, but his eyes stayed sharp. Is that so? Before I could respond, Laura turned, and her gaze locked onto mine. For a single, excruciating second, the world shrank. Recognition, confusion, fear. She masked it quickly, but I saw it. And I saw something else, too. Guilt. She didn't expect me here. She never expected me to find this place. And now she didn't know what I would do. I lifted my glass to her in a silent toast, smirked, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw her panic. Laura's panic lasted no more than a second, but I saw it. And more importantly, she knew I saw it. She turned away quickly, murmuring something to the masked man beside her. His head tilted slightly, curious but unconcerned. He didn't see me as a threat. That would be his first mistake. The man at the bar beside me chuckled softly. Ah, now I understand. I kept my expression neutral, taking a slow sip of my untouched drink. Understand what? The way you looked at her. He swirled his glass, watching Laura from across the room. Your first time here, but not your first time with her. I let a beat pass before I answered. You're observant. He smirked behind his mask. We all are. The question is, does she know you're here for her? I exhaled through my nose, as if amused, as if I wasn't standing in the same room as my wife and her secret life, as if I wasn't already planning how to dismantle everything she had built. She does now. The man laughed. Interesting. You'll do well here. He was testing me, feeling out if I was a liability, if I was unstable, if I was here for the wrong reasons. So I fed him the answer he wanted. I'm not here for her, I said, my voice low, controlled. I finally turned to meet his gaze, cold, unwavering. I'm here to take something from her. His smirk widened. Good. He raised his glass. To new beginnings. I clinked mine against his. And across the room, Laura's fingers curled into a tight fist. She knew me. She knew what I was capable of. And for the first time, she understood. I wasn't here to beg for her back. I was here to bury her. Laura's fingers remained curled in a tight fist, her knuckles whitening against the soft glow of the lounge. She was unraveling, and she knew I was watching. I let the tension simmer between us, turning my attention back to the man beside me. He had taken an interest in me, a dangerous thing but also an opportunity. I needed to know more. About him, about this place, about how deep this secret ran. So I leaned in slightly, mirroring his posture. Men like him loved that, being studied, being understood. This place, I said, my voice even, feels selective. He chuckled. You could say that. It's not for everyone. I swirled my drink lazily. And yet, I made it in. Did you? He mused. Or are you being observed? I met his gaze. Held it. You tell me. A slow smirk stretched across his lips. Approval. He liked the game. This place is about power, he said after a moment. Most places are. But here, we strip away the illusion that it's anything else. I nodded slowly. And the women? His smirk didn't falter. Some come willingly. Some are taught. My grip on the glass tightened, but I didn't flinch. Didn't let the disgust reach my face. Because he was telling me exactly what I needed to hear. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just indulgence. This was something worse. I exhaled through my nose, feigning amusement. And who teaches them? His gaze flickered to Laura. I kept my face blank, unmoved, even as my mind screamed. She wasn't just participating. She was creating. She was grooming. My wife, the woman I once built my life around, wasn't just lost in this world. She was a leader in it. Something inside me snapped into place. Rage became focus. Pain became clarity. Revenge wasn't just necessary anymore. It was inevitable. And it would start tonight. Laura's laughter had stopped. She wasn't talking anymore, wasn't smiling. She was watching me. She knew I wasn't here by accident. I let the silence between us stretch. Let her mind race. Let her feel what I had felt for months, uncertainty, fear. Then I moved. Not toward her. Not yet. Instead, I turned to the man beside me. The one who had power here. I want in, I said simply. He studied me for a moment, then smirked. We'll see. I leaned in slightly. What if I prove myself tonight? He chuckled. How? I let my gaze flick toward Laura. Just for a second. Enough for him to notice. Enough for her to see. Then I turned back to him, my smirk matching his. I'll take something that belongs to someone else. His eyes darkened with interest. And across the room, Laura stiffened. She knew. The game had begun. Laura's mask of control was slipping. I saw it in the way her fingers twitched against the fabric of her dress, in the way she shifted slightly closer to the masked man beside her, seeking reassurance. She wouldn't get it, because I wasn't after her. Not directly. Not yet. I turned my attention back to the man beside me. Give me a name. He raised a brow. Eager, aren't we? I held his gaze. Isn't that the point? A slow smirk. He liked my confidence. Then he nodded toward a woman across the room. Not Laura. Another one of their trained. Younger. Vulnerable. She belongs to Victor, he said. Take her from him. Victor. The man Laura was sitting with. Perfect. I exhaled slowly, stood, and walked toward the girl without hesitation. Laura's eyes widened slightly. A flicker of panic. She knew exactly what I was doing. She couldn't stop me, because in this world, power wasn't in love. It was in possession. And tonight, I was taking something from her. The moment I reached the girl, I felt Laura's stare burn into me. She knew this wasn't about the girl. It was about her. I leaned down, offering my hand. Come with me. She hesitated, just for a breath. Then she obeyed. Victor, Laura's companion, sat up straighter, his posture shifting. Annoyance. Possessiveness. But not resistance. Because here, if she chose to leave, he couldn't stop her. Laura's hand gripped his knee. A silent message. Fix this. I smirked. Let him try. I led the girl across the room. Slow, deliberate. Claiming her in front of everyone. And as I passed Laura, I murmured just loud enough for her to hear. How does it feel to lose love? Her breath hitched. For the first time since this all started, she was the one who felt powerless. Laura acted fast. Too fast. She stood abruptly, her mask of control cracking as she turned to Victor. Do something. A demand. A plea. But Victor didn't move. He just watched, his jaw tight, eyes flicking between me and the girl now standing at my side. Assessing. Because here power wasn't taken, it was given. And I had just made him look weak. Laura's fingers curled into fists. She understood. She had spent years learning these rules. And now I was using them against her. She turned her gaze to me, eyes dark, lips parted. Furious, afraid, uncertain. For the first time, she didn't know what I would do next. That was the moment I knew. I had already won. Laura's breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling too quickly. She had always been the one in control. The one who manipulated, who dictated the rules. But not tonight. Not anymore. I let the silence stretch, let her feel the weight of her unraveling world. Then, I leaned in slightly, my voice just loud enough for her alone. You built this place, Laura. But you forgot one thing. Her throat bobbed. She didn't speak. I smirked. A kingdom built on fear falls the moment someone stops being afraid. Then I turned my back on her. Because there was nothing left to say. She had already lost. And as I walked away, guiding the girl with me, I heard it. The sound of Laura's world shattering. A sharp inhale. A choked breath. And finally a single, broken whisper. Michael! But I didn't stop. Because I wasn't hers anymore. And she sure as hell wasn't mine. Game over.